Check mic 1 2, check mic 1 2, test.
fear of information manipulation as yet another successful means to weaken trust. We have seen different other examples during the COVID-19 pandemic, during disinformation campaigns that have been spread during the COVID-19 pandemic, especially in the first early ages. And there are two important lessons to be learned here. First, that during that COVID-19 disinformation campaigns, we have seen that scientific facts related to the pandemic are uncomfortable. They're difficult to comprehend, which is why there is a general tendency to avoid evidence-based information. It was easier for the audience and more comfortable to believe in simple solutions presented by this information, which is also the case for climate change denialism. Second, disinformation thrives in times of crises and in times of trauma. In these times, disinformation does not only capitalize on these crises, it weaponizes them. And climate change presents yet another multi-dimensional crisis with regards to resources, health, society, economy, politics. The entire complexity is vast and is very global and regional at the same time. And therefore it represents a high level of uncertainty and high level of new various vulnerabilities, which in combination with the tendency to avoid difficult facts gives us an extremely fertile ground for new disinformation to grow. On social media, we have observed that there has been a very sharp increase in the amount and also in the intensity of climate change denialism, with climate change disinformation exponentially growing within the last 12 to 24 months. The phenomena is especially further charged by the number of bots, by the number of automatic programs that perform automated tasks faster and in greater volume. And it's also intensified by disinformation being spread by so-called verified accounts. And especially this is the case since Twitter, now X, has changed their policies. And at the same time, we're also seeing that there are negative impacts on climate change disinformation, that these negative impacts remain strong, especially and even after exposing and correcting the false information. Last year, climate change disinformation peaked during the COP27 event, exactly a year ago. The number of tweets have skyrocketed during that time, however, have been produced only by a very small number of accounts. And while this daunting development calls for more urgent action to tackle climate change disinformation, there's hardly any mention in that current COP in the United Arab Emirates on the issue of climate change and disinformation. The COP28 UA has produced 6 different declarations on various numbers of climate-related challenges, from global climate finance to climate and health and funding to climate relief and peace. However, none of these declarations mentions disinformation or the impact of manipulation of information in the context of climate. So there is also quite a gap and still some call for urgent action. And I know that the authors of the policy brief, Battle for Water, Truth and Climate and Environment, will go deeper in presenting also their research and their findings, but let me just finish with 2-3 recommendations from my own, very general ones. On a state level, there must be more international cooperation, more knowledge sharing, more best practice sharing on how to tackle climate change disinformation. On a society level, there must be more tolerance to break out of their own filter bubbles, to create more understanding and awareness amongst each other, amongst different groups of society. On a personal level, we need to be more vigilant. There needs to be more critical thinking and more rational reflection in how we consume and produce our own information. And if we go back to the quote at the beginning that knowledge is power, we have to also acknowledge that depriving people from acquiring knowledge is control. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michael, for setting the scene for our discussions and for sharing with us these important thoughts. We will bring you back towards the end of our panel. But now I would like to introduce our panel of experts. And before I start, I actually have to make also important correction. This event is also co-sponsored by UNESCO. And one of our panelists is Dr. Banu Neutane, who is an advisor for ICT and sciences and open access to scientific research at UNESCO. So Banu will be one of the panelists who will be sharing his insights. For UNESCO, open science is very important. There was even a resolution encouraging open science, so we will hear more about that. Our other panelist is Dr. Karina Shiroki. Karina is Associated Professor of International Relations at Stockholm University. And Karina will be sharing with us her reflections also on a very particular context of disinformation in the context of the Russian aggression in Ukraine. And our last panelist is Jakub Baraza. Jakub is a water and climate governance expert, currently works at the Netherlands Enterprise Agency, but previously studied at the IHE Delft Institute for Water Education, where he conducted research on disinformation in the context of water cooperation, especially in the Eastern Nile. So this is our panel. And please feel free to also send questions through our Q&A button. But I would like to now start with the first question. It will be one question to all panelists. And if you can please share with us your reflections on who are the main actors using disinformation and what groups are targeted and what is the effect and danger. And you can introduce it in the context of a particular study or a little bit more in a general context. But I think we will start with Karina. So Karina, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Martina. Thank you for passing the word to me, and welcome everybody to our webinar. As related to the actors that are most frequently and systematically sharing disinformation in the context of Russian aggression in Ukraine, it is Russian state media, Russian media as such, and the so-called anonymous Telegram channels. Telegram is a social media, one can say designed in Russia by a Russian developer. And it is broadly used in Ukraine and beyond. And a lot of this information is shared on that particular channel, where it is an option not to identify yourself. So it is, in a sense, quite similar to rumors, which spread quite broadly in the context of war. And here I can relate to the opening remarks by Mikhail, who said that in a situation of uncertainty and a situation of instability or crisis, when people seek information and a lot is developing very fast, people seek information from various channels, sometimes reacting emotionally and not checking the sources that they're using to obtain the information. And that's where, unfortunately, anonymous Telegram channels are often used, and people become victims of disinformation through them.
Thank you, Karina. And now we will turn to Banu. Banu, how would you describe the actors who are behind this from your perspective? And a little bit, if you can share with us a little bit more about your work.
Thank you so much, Martina. One of the first things that I will do is, I will essentially try to describe, one of the things, which is woven in the title of this webinar. That is the truth. Perhaps the first, is essentially to understand, disinformation, which Michael has very rightly described as a willful, say, a twisting of fact and information before it reaches the ultimate, consumer of that resources. This information. The truth is normally, woven in the principle of factual correctness and should be consistent with the reality. And of course, the other thing is, this should also carry objective evidence throughout the vast discourse of conversation. The sense of truth is, therefore, is a complicated landscape that is essentially, woven in the tapestry of knowledge and coincides with variable, evidence. Not least, it exerts, consensus, strengths the concept of truth by highlighting the value of collective, say, intelligence, and that's the reason why we bring in peer review and other type dimension in the whole process. The problem, what happens is, during the conflict, all of these things, that I just, mentioned about truth, essentially vanishes. And in fact, you're left with a void where disinformation essentially becomes and takes a form of a weapon that can be somehow utilized on the opposing party to generate false narratives to manipulate public opinion or international opinion in this but you said where the disinformation is targeted to. Of course, this can be targeted to state actors. The governments are often involved in spreading disinformation in several folds. The other is also non-state actors. You actually see NGOs, INGO, and other like the organizers and involved in the whole process. The finally is and I think this is the canon right now that many governments utilizes. It's the social media manipulators, and in fact when they come in. Because the rate to which they spread within the tapestry of society is much faster than other say organized information channel. But still we basically have to look at the biggest source of disinformation still remains the media organizations, because they are the one who are in fact triggering disinformation in all possible sense. And one of the things that is very much attached to this is no media or new channel that is opaque for possible manipulation. They can always be manipulated either by process pressure, political pressure, because you have seen that in several countries which are even characterized and like vanguard of practicing democratization in societies, that country's media also has been very easily succumb to political pressure. The other thing that has happened is also financial pressure is there. You basically provide resources, and you ask a medium to somehow a broadcast a false narrative that will reach to its eventual say consumer. So I would say that there is state actors, non-state actors, and social media manipulator, but still the mainstream medias are still they are the one who are spreading disinformation to the tapestry of the society. Over to you, Martina.
Thank you, Banu. And I think this is a great segue to our third speaker, Jacob Baraza, who would like to tell us a little bit more on the actors. And Jacob, you're looking on a very particular case, Eastern Nile. So can you please tell us more? Who is the one who is spreading this information, and what can we learn from that case about the danger?
Thank you very much, Martina. First of all, I'd like to appreciate the fact that when it comes to disinformation, and more so with regards to social media, because my study was looking at the use of social media, and especially Twitter, now the current X, is that we have a number of actors. To begin with, we have the media, personalities or journalists, and this can be done through their practice in terms of trying to engage different actors and trying to bring them together so as to foster cooperation. But again, one thing is that with the powers that social media has given to the general public, it again also brings about another actor. The public is being targeted as a beneficiary in terms of those who would want to convince them to take sides, but also it also gives the public a power to directly engage with high-level government officials, to engage with journalists, and also to engage with diplomats. The fact that we have social media platforms easily accessible through internet and availability of phones that one can easily access, that makes them quite a powerful voice in terms of being a target and in terms of also being a serious actor in when it comes to public diplomacy. One thing that I realized from my study is that when you look at the messages, the hashtags, and the images that are used, it's such that the language used will tell you what kind of public or what kind of actor is being targeted. Like, for instance, if you want to target more foreign publics, then the use of English is used, because that way then you can easily target and engage online actors that are from other countries that mainly speak English. And if it's mostly internal, then you'll realize that people will go back to their own native language like Arabic or Amharic. And so that means that there is that space that has been opened up beyond the secret diplomacy that has been quite common in the past, to more of, I will call it new diplomacy, which again broadens the wider range of actors that are being engaged in terms of disinformation and misinformation. Thanks.
Thank you, Jakob. And you are bringing a very important context, how these processes affect negotiation on shared water resources. We've seen examples of this from the Euphrates and Tigris negotiations, from the Eastern Nile negotiations, also from the negotiations around the Jordan River. So this is something that's really preventing some of the actors to reach a compromise with their counterparts. So we would look into that later. And now I would like to go back to Karina and ask you if you could please tell us a little bit something more specific on your case that you were looking into. You were looking into the case of Ukraine. If you can share, please share with us some examples of disinformation used in this context.
Thank you, Martina. Indeed, in the case study that I have conducted, I looked into the case of Mykolaiv, a southern city in Ukraine. So on April 12, 2022, due to a Russian attack on the Dnipro-Mykolaiv water pipeline, the water pipeline has been damaged. And as a result, a city of nearly 500,000 inhabitants was left without any drinking water. So obviously it has created an issue, a huge issue. The water supply was partially reestablished by bringing water to each of the districts in the city of Mykolaiv, with particular distribution points and a schedule for distribution of water. In this context, obviously there was shortage of drinking water, and in the pipes there was only non-potable water that was not allowed to be used for cooking or drinking. So in this context, a huge wave of systematic and regular disinformation pieces was occurring, and it was disseminated again via various social media channels. Different disinformation pieces were generated on those channels, but also by Russian state media actively. And there were three main narratives that had perhaps different objectives. So the first narrative was that the drinking water in the city of Mykolaiv is missing as such, and there won't be any restorations of drinking water supply. The narratives trust that the city and the entire region is left. So basically the authorities have left the region. There is nobody to conduct renovations or conduct the necessary work to restore the water supply. The second narrative was that the water that is being disseminated and distributed to the inhabitants of the city of Mykolaiv is contaminated by various diseases, including cholera, and that people shouldn't come and pick up the water. And the third last narrative that was resurfacing every now and then was that the water that is being distributed by the local authorities and volunteers, that the water will not be available or won't be provided for children, elderly, and people with disabilities. So this case exemplifies how and which groups are targeted and for which purposes. So first of all, it is pretty obvious that these narratives have been used to undermine the trust to local authorities, regional, but also city authorities. It was aimed to destroy or in some sort harm societal cohesion, introduce some sort of societal clashes. but also to develop this trust to international and national humanitarian organizations and volunteers who were trying to assist in the situation. There was a study conducted by an organization called Civic, who conducted surveys among inhabitants of different cities, including Mykolaiv. And the results of their studies actually shows that this information regarding water is indeed targeting quite substantially trust to local authorities, but also this information creates a lot of psychological stress for the people, which at the end might make them be less willing to use humanitarian assistance, which is life-saving. And in this way, this information may not only damage the psychological stability of people, but also make them arrive to undesirable conclusions, to make them make a decision, if you like, to flee, for example, when it is not being when it's not being necessary. And in this sense, by forcing people make these decisions, this information can undermine not only their health by depriving them of water, but also to endanger their lives by forcing them to flee in a situation of an ongoing war.
Thank you, Karina, very much for sharing very specific examples. I think it will help our guests to understand how some of these processes work. And I now would like to turn to Jacob. Jacob, you were looking on the impact of disinformation campaigns on the negotiation process in Eastern Nile. So if you can please tell us a little bit more about this case and what strategies were used there.
First of all, the whole negotiation process starts around 2011 when there is an announcement that Ethiopia is planning to build a dam. And my study looks at the time between 2000 or rather 1990, okay, between 2000 and 2022. And remember, this is a time when there are quite a lot of events that are taking place. COVID-19 has just hit. And so there is a lot that is being done online. One of the key things that came out in terms of disinformation and misinformation is that the kind of images that are being used, the kind of texts that are being used, and the kind of hashtags that are being used is such a way to convince or to shape a certain narrative that will either promote support for the GAD or promote support against the GAD. I take a look at, for instance, hashtag It's Our Dam. Hashtag It's Our Dam was strategically used to garner support from both other basin countries like Kenya, Sudan, Ethiopia, and Egypt, with the argument that with the construction of the dam, downstream countries such as Sudan will benefit from having water throughout the year. But again, when you listen through it, it also calls for them to contribute, or even questions of what is the contribution of Egypt in terms of ensuring that there will be sustained flow downstream. There is also the argument again with regards to hashtag our dam to Kenya, which is like you are also going to benefit from electricity. But most importantly is how the GAD is genderized, and hashtag our dam together with hashtag it's her dam is used together with images of women in smoky kitchens or carrying heavy loads of firewood to show that this is a dam that is going to mainly benefit women. And for those actors that are interested in benefiting women and looking at the rights and how women can access energy, then this is a narrative that would support the GAD. But again, you realize that the reason why the GAD is being constructed mainly is for energy, and more so as a way of generating revenue for industrial development. So the question of how directly women are going to benefit from this, again, is a question to be discussed further. The other thing is around building nationalism for the GAD. And that one is also popularized online using hashtags such as hashtag our GAD, our dam, hands off Ethiopia, with the argument that, remember, the GAD is being constructed on our land. The river has a source in our land, and also the monies that are being used to construct the GAD belongs to Ethiopians. So for those of us who are not interested in seeing the development of Ethiopians, kindly keep off. And this is a narrative that is built both by Ethiopians abroad, Ethiopians in Ethiopia, and those that are supporting the GAD. And it's used to justify the argument that, okay, the other countries who might raise concerns in terms of how the developments are being done, how decisions around operation and maintenance are being done, or sustainability of the river, it's argued that, okay, for you, you don't have interest, and kindly keep away from the discussions on the GAD. So you can see from this engagement and the fact that with social media, it targets many millions of people, then it creates a certain narrative targeting a certain specific group.
It seems we are having, please continue, yeah, finish your thought. We are having some technical issue, but if you would like to finish your thought.
Okay. Yeah, so as I was saying, is that these strategic narratives are used to build or garner support for the GAD. And on the other side, when you go to Facebook, we also had other groups that were specific to the different countries and supporting their other agenda. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much, Jacob. And now we will go to Banu. And Banu, could you please tell us a little bit more about what kind of work UNESCO does on disinformation and on exposing this global problem? If you can help us to better understand our participants, how an organization like UNESCO works with these issues. And while Banu is talking, the other panelists, if you can please look at the two questions that we have in Q&A. We will turn to them right after Banu speaks. And to the other people who are listening to us, please, if you have more questions, feel free to type them in the Q&A section. But Banu, now the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Martina. One of the things, that I was really, fascinated by something that Karina and Jacob actually explain in their narrative. And what UNESCO essentially does is, it actually tries to see that whether or not disinformation should be the realm of the communication that happens in the world right now, or there should be something that is much more say vetted and trusted communication that happens. So I'm pretty sure that you are aware of something that we organized. And both the speakers have already said that internet is the key say platform through which disinformation spreads. So one of the things that UNESCO primarily does is we're trying to somehow like come up with some kind of globally agreed agenda on internet for trust. So we're trying to see that if there will be a guideline that countries can essentially follow to tame the social media platform or the internet in their country, primarily to make sure that disinformation doesn't fly. We are for access to information, but we are not for access to misinformation or disinformation. This is where I think putting some kind of like a stronghold in the mechanism that transfer some of these disinformation or misinformation needs to be somehow planted. So Internet for Trust, which was recognized sometimes in February this year. And that information is still available there. And some of you who think how internet needs to be somehow tamed for as an information channel or vehicle to the world. they can still, provide their comments. So this is still, there. So internet for trust is one of the things, that we are doing. But the other thing, that we are also doing, we essentially want to instill the characteristics of, freedom of, information and universal access to information. So this is also another thing, that we're doing, where we think that, sometimes, disinformation happens if the information doesn't reach to its intended, beneficiaries. So we are in fact saying that, okay, there should be a right to information. We actually, are monitoring the Sustainable Development Goal, 16.2, which primarily talks about, access to information. So we are monitoring, that particular, say point in sustainable development. But it's more than that. We're trying to see that we have seen that disinformation is being used as a weapon that can somehow be utilized in its on the opposing parties and generating false narrative. So this is something that we are doing. The other thing that we are also doing is that those journalists who are spreading say good message to each other, there is a program that actually protects the rights of a journalist to spread the right information to the world. So there is also freedom of expression and journalism is one of the axis of the program that UNESCO does. And what it does is it not only develops the framework that guarantees a journalist or a media person to convey and receive information without any threat, because most of the things that we're doing right now is during conflict there is some kind of a stronghold imposed by the governments who are trying to instill a different kind of parameters what kind of information can be shared or received by the journalist or by the medium. So this is something that we're doing. We're trying to instill that. The other thing that we are also doing is on media and information literacy, because a lot of consumer, they do not know what kind of information and they should accept and trust, and what kind of information they should somehow deny or refute. So there is also a major program that we do that is primarily on media information literacy. One of the third thing that we are primarily doing is to instill that okay, what are the technological innovations that are available there? Can we somehow bring that to fore, so that whatever information goes through a social media site or through these electronic medium, can that be somehow checked, or the tools will be available for the consumer, so that they can in fact review and see that whether something that is given to them is correct or not. So we are in fact working on this three pillar. One, that we're ensuring that journalists will provide the information that comes in without any threat or any any inhibition. The other thing that we're also doing is to see that there is the citizens as well as those people who share the information are properly trained and educated. And finally, what we are doing is we're bringing in the available technological tool, and then try to see that if some of these things that spreads in electronic medium can somehow be put through a fact checking say mechanism, so that the information that goes to its ultimate consumer goes without any kind of say misinformed entity or element in it. So these are the kind of three things that we are doing from the UNESCO side.
Thank you very much, Banu. I think you actually partly also answered the first question that we have from Junior Mike Vejuli. I'm very sorry if I mispronounced your name, but now I would also like to hear from Karina, your thoughts on the first questions. How do we detect and counter the spread of false or misleading information about water and climate issues on social media platforms? And if you can please try to be concise, I will also bring our two other panelists to reflect on this these questions. So Karina, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Martina, and thank you, Mike, for your questions. Detecting disinformation and finding remedies for that. This is a multifaceted issue. I think that here we must distinguish between various actors and their motivations to generate and disseminate disinformation. To my opinion, the most dangerous disinformation is when it is coordinated, systemic, lasts in time, and is state-sponsored. And we've been witnesses of Russian systemic disinformation on various issues, including climate, water, conflict, you name it, since many years ago. Russia has been systematically disinforming the global public about various issues, and its channels still exist, right? So Russia Today, or shortly RT, how they're called now, and Sputnik are existing, or they do exist and function in many countries, especially in the global south. They are quite effective in targeting various populations, disseminating various disinformation narratives. And here I think that the response should be systemic. Training and literacy work is of course very important to be able to make people more resilient to disinformation. But when the main actor is a state actor, and it's not to say that Russia is the only actor that disseminates systematically, there are other countries that engage into that, including Iran, for instance. So it has to be systematically addressed. Something that I just want to add to what Mikhail said in the beginning. Mikhail mentioned that knowledge is power, and here I would like to add that critical thinking is a life-saving skill. And of course, literacy has to be increased in terms of information checking. And if to go back to the case that I studied, Mykolaiv case in Ukraine, we can see how local authorities adopted robust and effective communication technologies and approach to that, and how they're using social media, even those platforms where this information regularly disseminates. They, in a way, started their own channels, and they try to battle the disinformation narratives through verified channels, providing information, not hiding their faces, naming their names. And by that, they're using the same platform in order to, in a way, not necessarily have a dialogue with the actors engaged in disinformation, but rather to counteract and battle them on their own battlefield.
Thank you very much, Karina, for giving us very specific examples. And now, Jacob, based on the work you've done on Eastern Nile, how would you say that, how can we detect and counter the spread of false and misleading information?
I think over and above what has already been mentioned, there is a need to engage researchers, because one of the things that I realize is that even while looking at some of the negotiations and the information that was being shared, is that the best way that the misinformation, disinformation was countered was through findings by researchers. The only challenge that we have with that is that, again, research and the manner in which it's disseminated is not easily accessible. So over and above looking at how researchers can be engaged to combat disinformation, there needs to be an intended move to make sure that the research and the findings is disseminated in such a way that it can be easily accessible or disseminated via social media. Yeah.
Thank you. And I would also like to bring back Michael, who gave our keynote speech. If you can reflect, Michael, your thoughts on this first question brought here by our participant, Mike.
Absolutely, I would love to. Thank you very much for the great question, and actually also for the amazing answers that we have already received from the various speakers on exactly that question, how to detect and counter the spread of false or misleading information, especially about water and climate issues on social media platforms. And I think a lot of great examples have already been brought to the table. First of all, I think there has to be more awareness that this is indeed a security threat and a threat to societies, governments, different people in different society groups, economic threat as well. So I think to understand the severity of the issue is probably the first way of solving it as well, of then putting more efforts from a multi-stakeholder perspective on detecting and on countering such misleading information on social media platforms. And I'd like to also refer to the third question that you have asked here, if there should be more partnerships and collaborations with social media platforms. Absolutely. I think also that the European Union has already made quite significant steps to engage more with social media platforms, to raise also the level of accountability that these platforms have. They're, in my eyes, part of the problem as well, because they provide indeed the platform where such disinformation is able to be disseminated and where it's able to be shared with the general public. But we also have to include the economic incentive of companies, of lobbyists that are also facilitating and actually buying advertisement for social media platforms to spread such information. So therefore, I would suggest as a general remark here that a multi-stakeholder approach is needed that includes the platforms, the economic actors and entities behind running these platforms from an economic incentive perspective, of course, the governments who have to engage with platforms and the private sector more actively, and the general public / academia science to also raise from a social perspective, from a bottom-up perspective, the issue and bring it more to the attention to the other stakeholders.
Thank you, Michael. And now I would like to turn to my colleague, Katie Goldie-Ryder, who works at CEWI, also with these issues. And I would like to, Katie, ask you if you can reflect on this from the youth perspective. What can youth do about these issues? And tell us a little bit how we see youth at CEWI. And then after that, I will go to Banu, because Banu, I think the third question is really directed to you because you work with these issues very much. So, but first, Katie, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Martina. So I'm the Youth Empowerment Champion for our Water Cooperation Diplomacy team at CEWI. So I work to support youth inclusion in our activities. Sorry. So often we see youth from the UN perspective, which ranges from an age of about 15 to 25. But at CEWI, we take a little bit of a broader approach, and we have a definition of youth that is inclusive of 35 and under. And very often we use the terminology young professional instead, because sometimes people can be quite young and working in this space, but they don't really want to identify that way. They want to be seen more as professionals in their field. So we try to phrase it or frame it a little bit like that and be a bit more inclusive. And acknowledging of the wide range of expertise that can range up until 35, that is youth. I think a lot of the things that have been said today about media literacy and science literacy are things that youth and young professionals are calling for themselves. They see this as something that really needs to be done. My addition to what has been said would be that it shouldn't be done without them. Youth and young professionals are very active on the different digital platforms. They and we, I have grown up with it and we're used to engaging this way, but they also acknowledge that there's a lot of misinformation that gets spread through there. And so when we develop capacity building, it should be really a two-way street with youth, developing for them, seeing the best way to target it and approach those kinds of campaigns for media literacy and science literacy done with them. So a two-way street of exchange, I would say.
Thank you very much, Katie. And I think now we will turn to Banu to say a little bit more concluding words on the partnerships and collaboration with social media platforms, but also other stakeholders like us, the scientists, different institutions. How can we work all together more effectively to tackle this problem?
Thank you so much, Martina. And I basically say kudos to the person who actually posted this third question, because that is the heart of the problem that I think entire society deals with right now, frankly put. See, partnership with social media platform is extremely difficult because they are based somewhere else, but they operate, globally. So unless, you have got some kind of, federated mechanism that exists, or, if you can establish or a partner in developing how they design their algorithms, that will definitely, make a headway. Because you may have, heard or, watched this video in social media that, whenever you are watching a TikTok video in China, you basically receive, something else than how you you watch, TikTok video in other countries around the world. Because in China, most of the videos that circulates are for, scientific triumph, or, youth doing fantastic job and so forth. When you're watching the same video or try to get into TikTok in other countries around the world, what you receive when you open the TikTok the platform, you receive, something else. So I think, there should be something or a way to somehow, manipulate or design algorithm that is socially fit and socially, useful. That's one of the things. But one of the things, that is extremely important is how you get, a government and institution involved in this. Whenever we talk about, social media platform, that actually gets relayed to you through a telecommunication operator or an internet operator. So how would you go to them and make them somehow realize that whatever the content using their backbone is being spread in the society is wrong? So they should also come on board. One of the most important thing is, again, I bring back the issue of media and information literacy to public, because public engagement is the key. Perhaps I think there will come a time that the school, as soon as students get into their middle school, instead of other than teaching them about say sex education and all kind of things, and perhaps social media ethics and the values will also be instilled in students. And I think the time has already come, or perhaps we're already late to do it. So that as soon as students get into middle school, they understand the context of using social media responsibly, because it's not only during say the events that is related to the conflict, but other times also social media is utilized differently. And the youth engagement to the overall say disinformation is extremely important. And what Katie said is super useful to the overall thing, that how can the youth not only become responsible and useful say internet user, but at the same time also become engaged in somehow dissipating some of these disinformation that is carried by this thing. And finally, there are several fact-checking initiatives that have come up. And these are all, AI algorithm based, fact checking. All you have to do is, if Facebook or Google or Instagram or others, will start, providing a little tab that, okay, check for the fact or something like that. That will in fact bring the entire, say, social media differently, because what we will have to do is we'll have to somehow like bring in this fact checking initiative as an implicit say element of social media platform. And of course this is something that the Internet for Trust that UNESCO organized, that has built some of these things. But to what extent this will be adopted by the countries, I think this is in the hands of the countries. Over to you, Martina.
Thank you very much, Banu. And now we are nearing the end. I would just like to ask all of our panelists to think in maybe one sentence, what is it that we need to focus on to bring this issue forward to some more successful resolution? So Karina, I will start with you. I will put you on the spot. So with one sentence, what would you think that, what should be our next steps as working with this issue?
I can only repeat the arguments that were provided earlier. It is that it is important to recognize, realize, and talk through the nexus between security, water, and climate, so that it becomes widely accepted before we can arrive to any policy-making strategies. And here, first, we need to seek consensus on recognition of the issue.
Thank you very much. And Jacob, what are your thoughts on this? What should our next steps be?
I think from my end, social media is here with us. It's here to stay. And in the words of Banu, we need to look at it from how are we going to enshrine integrity in the manner in which we are using it, so that as we move forward, we can curb misinformation and all the security risks that are aligned to it. Thank you.
Thank you. And now, Katie, what are your thoughts? What should be our next steps?
I think the spread of disinformation, misinformation is unavoidable and controllable, but we just have to have better ways of responding to it and countering it when we interact with it. And an inclusion of youth in this is fundamental to making this an effective response.
Very good. And Michael, what would you be your recommendations for our next steps?
Yeah, I would like to agree also with Jacob that social media is here to stay. We certainly have to live with that fact. However, there is also artificial intelligence and new technological means that are already here and will be increasingly relevant in our private, social, and also our professional lives in the future. So we should also think ahead 1 or 2 steps, how these new technologies, especially with regards to artificial intelligence, can also supercharge, and influence the spread of disinformation, especially also vis-a-vis climate change. And against the background that we are here also at the COP28, also the urgent call for the leaders of the COP that are participating to include that issue, disinformation with regards to climate change, more into the talks, the discussions that are being held at the COP.
Thank you. And Banu, very, very brief concluding thoughts. What should be our next steps?
The next step, just to one that, we should have a middle school curriculum established on responsible social media uses. And I think I'm looking at Katie, perhaps, she will in fact, take the first step toward instilling that. The second thing, what we have to do is, and this is something that we have been discussing, even before the start of this webinar, we have to somehow breach the divide between scientists and journalists. We are talking the same thing and systematically, trying to address disinformation, but scientists are talking with scientists and journalists are talking with journalists. Perhaps, there should be a way to somehow, cross over. And again, what I will do is I'll invite everyone to be part of this this World Press Freedom Day next year, where we will primarily be talking about environment and information.
Thank you very much, Banu. I can only say that CV is very committed to work with these issues. If you're at COP, please do reach out to our colleagues from the Water Pavilion. You can also reach out to us by email. We would love to hear more thoughts from you. And please stay with us for our next events. And thank you for your attention. So bye-bye.
Bye-bye.